What do you do for a living? I'm not talking about your job title or your daily tasks. I'm talking about what you actually do, what you actually create, what you improve, what you contribute. For some of you watching, this question might be pretty easy to answer. But for those of you who find yourself working as a middle manager, overseeing a human resources team at an insurance underwriting company, well, it might be a little harder. In the last century, service jobs have gone from representing less than a quarter of all jobs to now representing nearly 80% of workers. Now, when we think of service jobs, we think of people serving us coffee, finding us a pair of pants out of the back, or carrying our bags to the hotel room. Sure, they might be an unnecessary luxury for the people using these services, but it's still pretty easy to see that they do produce value, be it in the form of a nice cup of coffee, a fresh new outfit, or promptly delivered luggage, without the need of a physio appointment the next day. But you see, the thing is, the service sector is far more broad than the name implies. It encompasses everybody from call center salespeople to CEOs. In fact, it's quite difficult these days to find a job outside the service sector, specifically because those roles require special certifications. Remember that for later because it's important. But the growth of the self-serving service sector and the subsequent rise in bullshit jobs that came with it seems a bit odd. Surely, the efficient free market would weed out these individuals that are contributing nothing, punishing the companies that bear their salary expenses, while rewarding the more efficient organizations that do without them, right? And to understand why, it's time to learn how money works in the modern day to perpetuate the existence of people who work to nothing, but justify their own existence. And before we get into this quirk of modern advanced capitalism, we need to first look at Soviet communism. The Soviet Union was built on the idea of noble labor. The state said that work was honorable and dignified. The word Soviet loosely translates to a workers' council, and people took pride in their labor above all else. This caused problems when there wasn't enough work to go around amongst everybody. The drive for full employment meant that some people were given tasks that were obviously totally redundant. Factory managers hired as many people as they possibly could, because it was honorable to oversee the labor of so many of your comrades. They also feared that if they didn't give people jobs now, they wouldn't be able to get the people they did need in the future. This worker hoarding, as it became known, meant that some people were given jobs like counting endless inventories of nuts and bolts. Now, obviously, there are huge differences between the modern Western world and 1950s Russia, but there are also some concerning similarities. The theory of totally unnecessary jobs really started to gain traction after the anthropologist David Graeber published a book on bullshit jobs, in which he outlined 5 broad categories of jobs that have become more and more common. The first are what he called the flunkies. Think people like doormen, receptionists, chauffeurs, and assistants. These people exist to make other people feel better about themselves and could easily be replaced with some kind of technology. That's if they are really needed at all. Then there are the duct tapers. These are the people who work to alleviate problems that could very easily be fixed permanently. Think someone like an inventory manager that just so happens to have the system permissions to update stock levels in a warehouse, where that could have been done automatically or at the very least shared amongst floor staff. In his book, Graeber talks of a duct taper whose entire job was fixing the mistakes made by an apparently brilliant statistician. In reality, this star employee was actually hopeless, and the duct taper had to fight with bureaucracy to get his mistakes fixed before they could do any damage. This example shows that the solution to the problem is not always getting rid of the person in the bullshit job, because the duct taper themselves was probably contributing some value, but would be able to create value much more effectively had a needless obstacle been removed. The same cannot be said for the next bullshit job category on the bullshit jobs list, and that is the box tickers, the army of mindless drones that exist in big companies around the world because they make said companies appear legitimate to other big companies. Think of the people that create internal company newspapers with stories about key executives, or whatever it is that's reported on those things. I mean, nobody actually reads them, and that's the point. But if a company didn't have an internal newspaper, or a party planning committee, or a culture coordinator, then it might look like a small fry company not worth doing business with or working for. Now it's time to get to the real demons of the bullshit job world. The goons. Goons are an affectionate name to a class of jobs that actually has a negative impact on society, but make themselves necessary by simply existing. The classic example of this is in-house corporate lawyers. They don't really produce anything, but if you don't have them, then it will end up costing you more to hire external counsel to fight off lawsuits from companies that do have internal corporate lawyers. Perhaps the best example of this are patent trolls, which are basically companies that will buy up other companies with lots of generic patents and then try to sue other companies in the hope that they will just agree to settle out in court. Even the largest companies in the world are guilty of perpetuating this negative-sum game. Apple famously sued Samsung for a patent over a rectangular phone with rounded corners. Now just ask yourself, despite what you might think about patents and intellectual property, what value was being created by the thousands of people whose full-time job it was to enforce that ruling? Beyond just the lawyers, there are people like the lobbyists who fight to simply change the rules of the game around, and salespeople who exist purely to move business dealings from one company to another while being the definition of a middleman in the process. Now, you might think that the goons are bad, but they have nothing on the worst amongst the bunch of pointless workers: the taskmasters. These are the people assigned to watch over and manage people that really don't need to be watched over or managed. Effective management does exist, especially when it's coordinating a team with a wide set of skills. But someone like a sales manager who lords over a team of people with exactly the same job title is a little bit different. At best, they are going to be an overpaid cheerleader encouraging people to work harder in roles that may themselves be bullshit. At worst, they will be distractions desperate to justify their existence by calling meetings and creating strategic mission statements that achieve nothing but pulling people away from a job where they do actually have a chance of doing something meaningful. These roles are not singular prescriptions. In fact, some specifically useless employees may find their role is a combination of all 5 of these factors. Many middle managers exist to oversee fundamentally useless departments and only have a job because a highly layered corporate hierarchy makes the bigwigs at the top of the food chain feel good about themselves. But this doesn't answer the question: how did we get here? The Soviet Union created bullshit jobs because it was obsessed with having a job for everybody, and the nation took pride in labor. But our capitalist systems are supposed to be better than that, right? Well, sort of, but we are still victims of the same bureaucracy. Sure, companies would do well for themselves by cutting down these tasks, but sometimes these incentives can be misaligned with the actual decision makers. In the same way a Soviet factory worker might hoard staff to make themselves seem important, modern middle managers will do the same. In the same way factory walls were covered in propaganda about the brilliance of Soviet laborers, LinkedIn pages are covered in self-serving propaganda about how much an honor it was for some analysts to spearhead the joint development project for streamlining customer satisfaction in the bullshit corporation multi-platform digital sales ecosystem. In the same way that the Soviet Union was obsessed with everybody having work to do, even if it meant making up meaningless jobs, modern workplaces are obsessed with everybody working their 40-hour weeks, even if it means, well, making up meaningless tasks. This is before we consider the bureaucracy. Let's get one thing out of the way. Countries like the USA are not home to the totally free markets. There are laws and regulations about how to do pretty much everything. Want to build a factory? Well, you better make sure it's in a location zoned for heavy industry. And you better do an appropriate tender for the contract to construct that factory and have appropriate insurance. And if you are shipping your products overseas, you need to make sure you pay the appropriate tariffs and excises. All of these steps involves larger institutions which will themselves harbor bullshit jobs. Now, this isn't to argue for big government or small government. Some policies really are important. And of course, some are bullshit. But companies have had a very important part to play in this whole system as well. The growth in lobbying has led to the creation of more and more legislation, which has made it such that starting and maintaining a successful business of any size is almost impossible without a team of accountants and lawyers who will help a business owner navigate this bureaucracy. You might say this is in the best interest of a large corporation, because it makes it harder for potential competitors to get off the ground, but we don't want to point fingers here. Anyway, is there a solution to this? As a society? Sure, embrace the idea that it's okay to not work 40 hours a week. The idea that a job is either bullshit or not bullshit is not entirely correct. In reality, almost all jobs will have some level of bullshit built into daily routines. If it was acceptable to say, my work is done, I'm done for the day, then it would be a lot easier to see who is contributing nothing. As an individual? Not really. The truth is, if you do find yourself in a role with a lot of bullshit tasks, you might just have to suck it up in the short term. Maybe work on a side hustle free from bullshit in your off time. Or, embrace it. There are lots of people that are very proud of their superfluous yet important sounding titles. Maybe it makes the pointless meetings or irrelevant PowerPoints easy to get through now you know it's all bullshit. Of course, if you actually do want to truly immerse yourself in, bureaucracy, and you decide that one accounting job isn't good enough for you, then go watch our videos on EVE Online to find out how a video game has cultivated a financial system